Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Marcia Butler. I'm the webinar director here at Advice Chaser, and we welcome you today. Before we introduce our guest and get started, I need to do a bit of legal housekeeping. Advice Chaser, the host of this webinar, is not a registered investment advisor. We cannot and do not give financial advice. Today's presentation is for educational purposes only and cannot be considered advice for any person's individual situation. Advice Chaser regularly hosts informative webinars such as this one, featuring a variety of knowledgeable professionals, many of whom are licensed advisors. Any opinions, ideas, jokes, or principles expressed by presenters are their own, and however true, funny, or interesting, are not endorsed by Advice Chaser. Please do not act on the information you hear today without consulting a qualified financial professional. We're thrilled to bring you today's educational presentation. And just a few notes. Attendees are muted, but we do encourage you to ask questions using the chat box. The presenter will answer those queries during or after the webinar today as appropriate. If you ask a question in the chat box and we're not able to get to it, go ahead and leave your contact information as well. And if we can't get to your question, we'll reach out to you after today's event to make sure that gets addressed. We want this experience to be as educational as possible, so please don't hesitate to ask for clarification or expansion of the material. I'm just going to go ahead and make sure that's turned on. Yes, it is. I'd love to introduce you to our presenter today. Will Smith is the owner of Innovative Financial Solutions, which provides holistic financial planning focused on helping clients identify, clarify, and simplify the process of achieving their life goals and that which is most important to them through intentional engagement, systematic implementation, and results-focused planning of their financial resources. And we're so excited to have you back, Will. I know we've done several of these, and we're continuing in our series. Don't worry, folks, if you haven't seen it before, this is a good place to jump in. And I'm going to go ahead and turn over the time to you, Will.
Thank you, Marcia, and you're 100% correct. This is a good place to jump in if you haven't caught the previous webinars in the series, because this particular webinar is one of the cornerstones to being successful financially. Of course, we're talking about managing your expenses and your debts. And so before we actually get started with the next slide, I want to share some information with you as it relates to debt. This information comes from the Federal Reserve Bank. This is available online, so you can get that information right online, and Experian. So this says the average debt in America, according to the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, they reported an increase in the total amount of debt in the American household rising from 27 billion to 15.85 trillion in the first quarter of 2022. Mortgage debt rose by 250 billion during this period. Car loan debt increased by 11 billion. And to simply put this simply, debt is an issue in our country. It also says in this same study, which actually got the information according to Experian, that up from 2021, it shows that the average American has a consumer debt balance of $96,371. And that's up 3.9% from 2020. And so debt is a significant issue in our social fabric. And one of the things that I, as a financial professional, do is, of course, help people to understand how to manage their expenses and their debts. Because if it's not done, then it creates problems for people that affect their ability to enjoy the quality of life that they would like to live as they get older. And we talk about in the retirement years. Okay. So we'll move on to the next slide, because ultimately what this is all about is the ability to know how to take the necessary steps to manage our expenses and debt. And in order to do that, we have to understand how to minimize our debt and control our expenses. And we, of course, need to understand the difference between good debt and bad debt, because not all debt is bad. And I will talk more about that as we go along. But these are two of the basic things that we need to understand as it pertains to managing our expenses and our debt. So the question becomes, first and foremost, what are our expenses? Because when we think about expenses, most of the time we think about things like our mortgage, our car note, maybe our grocery bills or utilities and things like that. But what are expenses? And when you really think about it and you put it into a correct perspective, what you learn or understand is that expenses are anything that we spend money on. The gas for your car, the windshield wipers for your car, the Hulu account that you have, the nail salon trip that you take every week or every other week to make yourself look pretty if you're a woman, the trip to the barbershop to get groomed if you're a man, but things that you do for your children if they're in sports, if you take trips, vacations, if you do the movie theaters, anything that we spend money on is an expense. And we need to really be mindful of that as wise stewards of our money, because if we don't think about it and put it in that perspective, it has a tendency to get away from us. And that's when we start morphing into the situation of becoming people who have debt problems. Okay. So we talk about expenses and of course what they are. So then how do we control them, right? How do we manage them? How do we do the things that we need to do to keep this under control? Well, the reality is no matter what level of financial success you achieve, you always have expenses, whether you're wealthy or whether you're not wealthy, right? So it's vital to understand how to minimize and control them. And it's vital to understand that expenses that are not controlled oftentimes put us in a position of a financial deficit, which I like to call bondage, right? Because let's just take some simple examples. If you have a credit card and in a month's time, you put your groceries on that credit card, you put your gas on that credit card, you go to the movies and you put that on your credit card, right? You go out to restaurants 2 or 3 times a month and you put that on your credit card. And you do all of these other things. You have some car, repairs you need, you put that on your credit card. And you look up and at the end of the month, you have $1,648 on your credit card, right? Well, that is a byproduct of expenses. Now, if you don't manage those expenses effectively, then what happens is when you get the bill, they're not going to necessarily send you the bill unless it's an American Express where you have to pay it all off at one time. They're going to send you a bill with a minimum payment. And that minimum payment may be $43 or something like that. Okay. Well, let's say you decide you pay $200. That still left you $1,400 plus for that credit card. And then you go the next month and you have expenses. You have your grocery shopping. You have your gas for your car. You have, some new shoes that you had to buy for your child who's participating in athletics, or a leotard for your daughter who's going to be in ballet, or, all of these things that are life that we spend money on. And now next thing you know, you have another $950 that you put on that credit card for that month. But you didn't pay off the full amount for the previous month. And then you add it to the next month, and you probably had enough money coming in to actually pay it off. But that bill came and it said you only owed $43. And we kind of get comfortable with that and say, okay, I'll pay it off later. But then it gradually builds up. And the next thing you know, you have a $9,000 credit card bill. So what started off as expenses has now morphed into bondage, because now you are legally obligated to the credit card companies to pay them the money that you owe them. And it doesn't matter whether you lose your job. It doesn't matter whether you have some kind of adverse situations that happen in life that's going to require you to put out a ton of money, like to repair your roof or to replace your HVAC system because it went out. The credit card companies don't care about the life experiences that are befalling you. All they care about is that you owe them the money that you owe them, and they want that money. And that's true with every other creditor. So the point is that these expenses, which didn't start off as massive, can gradually sneak up on us and create a problem, to where, as I said in the beginning, the average household has $96,000 in debt. Okay. So as we continue on, we want to talk about how do we deal with this debt? How do we manage debt? How do we manage expenses? What are things that we can actually do to help us to put this in its proper perspective and to be more effective with it? Well, it starts with identifying where your money is going. We have a limited amount of resources. And no matter how much money any of us have, there's still a limit to it. So where's the money going? Why is it going where it's going? So these are questions that we need to ask ourselves if, again, we want to be better managers of our money and we want to protect ourselves from getting into financial distress. We need to understand when bills are due. And we have to ask ourselves questions of like, do I need this or do I just want it? Because oftentimes we spend money on things, and it's okay to take care of your wants, and you work hard and you should reward yourself, and there's nothing wrong with that. But there has to be boundaries. And if there are no boundaries to how we manage our money, we set ourselves up for a potential situation where on the back end of life, we pay the consequences of it, or we suffer the consequences of it, okay? Is there a comparable cost-effective alternative? In other words, can I do what I'm doing in a more cost-effective way? And being able to understand what your total expenses are. So this is a really long way of saying we need to have a budget, okay? That's what this is really saying. It's a long way of saying we need to have a budget. And a part of having a budget is asking questions. A part of having a budget is evaluating things and determining, do I need this? Do I want this? Do I need this now? Can I put this off and do it later? Can I save money so that at the time that I do this, I already have the money put away so that I can pay for it outright and I don't have to put it on a credit card or finance it or something of that nature. This is all a part of that whole process of how do we minimize and control expenses. As we move on in this process, there are a number of other things that we have to be mindful of. You can go into the next slide, Marche. One of those things is we have to get organized, right? Getting organized is critical. I was talking with my oldest son this past week, and to be quite honest with you, for his age, he's probably ahead of his peers. He and his wife got married at 27, I believe. They became 26. They became homeowners at the age of 28. By the age of 30, she was a stay-at-home mom. He was taking care of the family. They had 2 Lexus vehicles. He had probably $75,000 to $100,000 that he accumulated in savings. He had a side business. He has investments, and he's only 35 now. So he is well ahead of his peers. But we were talking the other day and said, Dad, I need you to help me to kind of get some stuff organized, because he has a vending machine business. He helps me with what I do in terms of my real estate investment business. And he just needed help with some things. So I said, okay, this is what you need to do. So I gave him a spreadsheet, a tool that I use when I work with people. And I said, you need to put this information in here, you need to do this, you figure this out, you do that. And he came back to me and he says, as I've gone through this, I'm disappointed in myself. He's like, I had no idea how much money we were actually bringing in and how much we were actually spending until I put it on paper and made it clear, and it opened my eyes. Because they want to move to a new house. There's some other things that they want to do, and they are kind of going back and forth in the process of saying, well, can we afford to do this? We may don't have enough money to do this. We might have to wait to this time. And I was like, well, you can't answer those questions until you have accurate information about your situation, because you're just operating from the opinion that you have in your mind of your situation, but that opinion is not based on actual numbers. Now that he has the actual numbers, he realizes there are some things that they could do if they just map it out and get deliberate with how they're doing what they're doing. So this is the process of getting organized, okay? And that's why I use that example. Get organized about when your bills are due. You set your bills, and you don't have to do it this way, but you can set your bills according to when you are paid. Because it may be possible, and people don't think about this, but it may be possible that the majority of your bills are in the first half of the month, between the 1st and the 15th. So let's say that you have monthly expenses of $4,700, but 36 of it is due between the 1st and the 15th. But you only get paid a certain amount of money on the 1st, and then you get paid another amount of money on the 15th. And I have seen people who operate this way and never realize that because their expenses were more concentrated in the first half of the month, they were using debt, credit cards and things to help them get by. But then in the second half of the month, they felt they had all of this extra money because they had less expenses. And rather than redirecting that money accordingly to manage their expenses to keep them from being in debt, they enjoyed themselves, not being conscious of the situation because they didn't have it on paper and they didn't have it organized. So I just simply said, hey, let's look at this and let's make some changes so that you can now be aware, because once you are aware of something and you are consciously aware of it, it tends to provoke you to take a better course of action towards it. So these are different things that are part of being organized. Categorize expenses. We all 2 types of expenses: obligated expenses and non-obligated expenses. So here's an example. An obligated expenses is your rent, your mortgage, your car note. Why do I call it obligated? It's obligated because you have made a commitment to the extent whereby which if you don't make that payment, there are negative consequences that you have to suffer. A non-obligated expense is something like a Bally's membership. Now, I have a Bally's, not a Bally's member. Yeah, Bally's, but I have a LA Fitness membership. My membership, $19 a month. I can stop paying that at any time that I want to. There's no negative consequences that I will suffer. I can't use the facility anymore, but I can exercise outside. I can exercise in my basement. I can take walks. So there's no negative consequence that I will suffer if I cancel that membership or if I don't pay it. They'll just cancel the membership. It doesn't even get reported to my credit. So that's the difference between a obligated and a non-obligated expense. Guess what? You have an automobile. Your automobile is necessary for you to get back and forth to work. The gas that you put in your automobile is an obligated expense. If you don't put gas in your automobile, you may not have realized this when you purchased the car, but the car made an agreement with you. And the car said, I will take you to work as long as you take care of me. That means feed me when I need to be fed. And that means nurture me when I have some aches and some pains and get me back to good health. If you don't do those things, I'm not going to operate for you. Yes, that's what your car told you. You may not have paid attention because you were so excited about getting the new car, but the car said that to you. So putting gas in your car is an obligated expense for which if you don't do it, there's a negative consequence. You can't get to work. You can't get to the places that you want to go. So these are all things that we have to take an assessment of and ask questions about as we go through this process of getting organized. Can I do without it? Or am I willing to? Some years back, the recession hit me very, very hard. I had to make some decisions. One of those decisions, I said, I need to get rid of cable television. And I need to cut these cell phone plans down because I'm just spending too much money on them and it's not helping me. I didn't suffer any negative consequences by doing that, but it did help me to get my situation under control. So I didn't need cable television. I can still find out what's happening on the news with regular ABC, CBS, or depending on where you live at, regular news, regular TV stations. There's enough conversations going on every day from everybody who I'm around. Did you hear about this? Did you hear about that? So I wasn't lacking in getting any news. So I made a conscious decision that says I can do without this for the time being. Now, years later, I still don't have cable television. I've gotten so accustomed to not having it that I don't even need it. I use the satellite, the what you call them things, the antennas, the digital antennas, right? I use that, which again goes into asking a question. Are there cost-effective alternatives that I can utilize to help me accomplish what I'm trying to accomplish? You got to have a plan. And that plan should be based on what your goals and your priorities are. And we actually talked about that in a previous webinar. So I'm not going to kind of go too in depth onto that. But these are all steps that are included in how do I minimize and control expenses, right? If we keep going to the next slide, one of the other things that you're going to understand is that this is something that requires the intangibles, what I call the intangibles, okay? The X's and the O's are important, but there has to be something on the inside of you that motivates you to take the action necessary. And one of those things is discipline, because it's going to require a consistent and diligent pattern of behavior to achieve and maintain the level of financial success that I'm talking about, where you live debt-free. It's going to require patience, because if you're not already there, then it's going to require you to make changes in the way that you're doing what you're doing and potentially give up some of the things that you enjoy doing at this moment in order to get you to where you want to be. You have to have some clearly defined goals. Like once I went through a process of recovering from what I experienced during the recession of 08, because I had a lot of real estate, a lot of investment properties. I had a significant number of negative experience with vandalism, and people were stealing plumbing, breaking into the homes and stealing copper out of them. And it was just a mess. And so I had to go through a process to get back to where I needed to be and wanted to be. And it required for me to have discipline and patience and to have clearly defined goals. And as I did that, I realized that I had to determine what was more important. So here's a statement that I'm going to make that I utilize for myself. When I look back over time, the pleasures that I pursue today, when I look back over time, will I be able to say that those pleasures were worth what it cost me on the back end? If I'm not where I want to be, and I believe it was in the first or the second webinar, one of the things that I talked about is in the United States of America, 61% of Americans are dependent on Social Security and or friends, families, and charities. And we're talking about in the wealthiest country in the world, which is the United States. Only 2 out of every 10 Americans are what we call financially independent or wealthy. When we get to the back end of life, those golden years, will they be golden? And if I live 30 years in retirement, because if you retire at 60, you could very well live to 90. Matter of fact, the fastest growing age group prior to COVID was people turning age 100. So we're living longer because of technology and medicine. We're not necessarily living healthier, but we are living longer. Things that used to kill us, diabetes, high blood pressure, people are living longer with those diseases and conditions because of medication and technology. So my point is, if you retire at age 60, 62, 63, you can live another 25, 30 years. How do you want to live those years? Will your golden years be golden? Or will you look back and say, you know, if I could do it all over again, I will do things differently. And I will tell you a fact that applies to me. I can't tell you if it applies to anybody else. Every single human being that I have ever spoke to who's north of 65 years old, and I've asked them, if you could go back and do things differently as it relates to how you manage your money, what you did with your money, and all those things. I'm not even talking about career and jobs. I'm just talking about the things you did with your money in helping you to position yourself for where you are now in life. If you could do things differently, would you? And I have not met one soul who said, no, I wouldn't do anything different. Not one. So what that tells me is that if you could have a conversation with your older you and ask your older you, what should I be doing right now to make sure that when I get here, I'll be where I want to be? They will tell you a lot of what I'm telling you right now. And that's a byproduct of making a conscious effort to think about what you're doing and to make some decisions that are going to assist you in the process of being where you want to be. So that goes directly into having priorities. We have to prioritize what we do, when we do it, and how we do it. And then we have to have a system that helps us to implement and operate these practices that we want to put in place to support our financial success. And again, we talked about, I believe it was in the last webinar, we talked about a system. So feel free, once you get an opportunity, to review that, because we talked a great deal about that in the previous webinar. All right, so as we go forward, we want to understand what debt is, right? Because managing expenses are one thing, but then understanding debt is a different thing. And it's actually okay to use debt to your benefit. But there's two different types of debt. So when we look at debt in general, that all of these different terms that you see here apply to things that are debt. Of course, you know, everybody knows what credit is. A bond, when you buy a bond, what you are doing is you're loaning money to whoever the company or institution is you bought the bond from. That's a debt. Now, on your side, if you purchase the bond, it's good debt because the assumption is you purchase that bond, you're gonna get 4, 5, 6% interest for a number of years. That means you're gonna get a return on your investment. Hopefully, the return will outpace inflation, which will be positive. Okay, but even if it doesn't outpace inflation, it's still, as it pertains to this discussion, it's still what we call good debt because you're on the good side of the debt. Okay, of course, leases are debts because there are obligations that you have where you have to pay a certain amount of money. And if you've ever leased a car, if you break the lease early, you have penalties that you have to pay. Okay, so all of these different terms are associated with debt. And again, it doesn't mean that they're all bad because if we move forward, what you know about debt is there's two sides to debt. There's the person who owes the debt, and then there's the person to who the debt is owed to. So you can go to the next slide, Marche, which means that you could be on the good side or you could be on the bad side, right? The party who owes the debt and the party who is receiving the debt. Each side is a component of a debt arrangement, right? So what makes debt bad or good? Debt is bad or good based on which side you are on, right? The US operates and is sustained by debt. If you pay attention to the news, you hear every year we go through this political battle of trying to raise the debt ceiling. It happens every year, at least for the last 10, 12 years that I can remember. We hear that happening every year. Why? Because the US operates and is sustained by debt. The Great Recession that we had in 08, the reason why that happened is because debt was the chief component that put us in the position to have to bail the banks out and a lot of these other institutions, because if they didn't bail them out, the collateral damage would have been too great. And a lot of people who don't necessarily understand debt didn't agree with that. But think of it this way. Because of the banking system and because of how intricately woven into the US economy it is, auto mechanics, people who replace windshields, people who drive trucks, who do deliveries to serve restaurants, people who mop floors, people who bake cakes and pies and desserts for delis and these types of organizations. People like that would have been affected if the banks didn't get rescued. And so while a lot of the focus was on the big bank executives getting bailed out, what wasn't being talked about is how if they didn't get bailed out, little people would have been impacted in a significant way and not been able to pay their bills, not been able to sustain their quality of life and do all of the things that they would have needed to do because of their financial because of the impact financially that would have happened to them. So I'm saying all this to say that debt is that critical to the structure of our society. So we just need to understand it. And that's the main purpose for why I'm saying all of this. Okay. So, but again, as we keep going forward, we need to understand that debt is such a significant issue that it is impacting our overall ability to be financially secure. So if you, as you see here, in 2007, the average retirement saving for US workers was $45,000.
Oh,
And
I
that,
think you meant 2007. You said 2070.
oh, okay, all right, yeah, 2007. And that's across all age groups, okay? Now, pre-recession retirement savings averaged, as we look down here, 52% of households had less than $25,000 saved for retirement. 13% had less than 50, 11 between 50 and 100, 12 between 100 and 250, and 11% over 250, right? Even today, depending on which study you look at, the average retirement savings for people ages 45 to 54 is about 125,000. That's just that age group. Now, we're talking about an age group that's like one phase away from retirement. The 45 to 54, that's like one phase away from retirement. And yet their average retirement savings is about $125,000. You take that into consideration with the fact that most people don't have pension plans anymore. Outside of the federal government, state governments, and situations like that, most of corporate America doesn't offer pension plans. So the retirement savings, it's the predominant resource that people are going to have outside of Social Security. If you factor in small business professionals, small businesses are even worse. Small business self-employed professionals are even worse off with their retirement savings. They are less than $50,000. So when you put all of this into perspective, it's not difficult to understand why 61% of Americans are actually dependent on Social Security, family, friends, and charitable organizations, right? So as we continue on, we want to understand the pivotal thing that we have to do to manage debt is control our spending. That's the pivotal thing. We have to control our spending. The other aspect of this is there has to be a desire to be debt-free. What I've learned is this, and this is true almost for any situation. As human beings, whatever we emotionally commit to, we have a tendency to have a very high success ratio of making that happen. And that's the reason why an individual can decide to buy a car. And with no planning at all, other than taking a couple of visits to car dealerships and making a decision on which car dealership they want to buy it from and which car dealer, salesperson is going to give them the best offer. Other than that, they take no prior planning in determining whether or not they can actually afford that new car payment. And so I asked this in seminars, hey, how many of you all have bought a new car? A lot of hands go up. I say, great. How many of you 6 months before you bought that car said, okay, let me do the research, let me figure out how much it's going to cost, and then let me for 6 months save this amount of money to make sure that I can afford this car note? Nobody's hand goes up. They go buy the car, $500 a month. For 5 years, they pay $500 a month. Stop paying for the car. 6 months later, if I come to that person and says, hey, you should throw an extra $500 into your 401k plan. Guess what they'll tell me? I don't have it. Now, why did I use that as an example? Because when we want a new car, we emotionally commit to that new car. And our emotional commitment to that new car puts us in a mind frame where we do everything necessary to make sure we can afford to make the payment for that car. But putting monies away into my retirement when I'm 36 years old and I don't plan to retire until I'm 60, that doesn't have immediate gratification. My emotional commitment to that isn't there. And so it's more difficult for me to convince myself that I can do that than it is to convince myself that I can afford to put $500 towards a new car payment. So these two components are important in terms of us managing debt at this point. Go ahead to the next slide. So, as I said, we got to understand the difference between good debt and bad debt. So let's look at what the difference between good debt and bad debt is, okay? Good debt is a tool that's used to leverage your existing financial resources to increase your income and improve your overall financial position, okay? So let me give you an example. I had a coworker years back working for a furniture store, and the furniture store was doing a liquidation, and they decided that they were not going to deliver the furniture, that the customers had to make their own arrangements for delivery. And what they told some of the warehouse workers is, hey, if you have a pickup truck and you want to deliver the furniture, that's fine. You can deliver the furniture. We will even allow you to do this during, business hours. So I had a friend, coworker, who decided to go buy a pickup truck because of this, because he realized that a couple of other people that he was working with were earning a couple of $100s a day doing this. So he went and bought a $30,000 pickup truck, financed it. So he incurred debt. He immediately, 2 to 3 days a week, started delivering furniture. During and after he got off work, he was generating somewhere in the neighborhood of about $400 or $500 a week. His truck payment was only about $300 and something. I spoke to him years later, and he said to me, he said, Will, I never paid one penny for that truck. That truck paid for itself. The deliveries and the customers who paid me to take their furniture, to deliver their furniture, they paid for that truck. Not only did they pay for that truck, when I had spoken to him, this was about 7, 8 years later, he had over $100,000 saved up in his account because of the money that he was able to make delivering furniture. That is what you call good debt. Now, if he'd have bought that truck to go do donuts in the dirt and in the mud, then there would have been bad debt, right? So good debt works to your benefit. Bad debt works to your detriment. So what is bad debt? Bad debt is bondage that exhausts your financial resources. It does not increase your income. It does not improve your overall financial position. It basically just puts you in a deficit position. And so sometimes we can't avoid bad debt, but we at least need to understand the difference. Okay. So you have a home mortgage, $3,915 a month. You have a personal loan for credit cards, $82,000. That's $916 a month. You have $51,000 BMW, $535 a month that you use to drive, to your job. I have a pickup truck for $15,000 to deliver furniture, right? I have $900 a month mortgage that generates $1,500 a month income, or $1,800 a credit card to purchase lawn equipment for businesses. These are different. These are examples of good debt versus bad debt. Okay, one improves your situation. Okay, now obviously a home is a place to live. So either you're going to rent or you're going to own. So a home doesn't necessarily constitute bad debt, because eventually, once the home is paid off, you'll have equity in the house. It will increase in value. It'll be an asset to you. Okay. But personal loans, if you're not using that money to leverage it, it's bad debt. $51,000 BMW looks nice, may ride great. It's personal use, it's bad debt. Okay. Pickup truck, that's the example that I used, right? Investing in real estate, my sister, I convinced her to take a loan from her insurance policy because she had a cash value insurance policy. I convinced her to take a loan from her insurance policy, buy an investment property in the city of Baltimore. She took the loan, fixed the property up, and it was a duplex. That property was generating about $2,200 a month. It's good debt. So understanding this, it just puts you in a position of being empowered to make better decisions with what you do with your money. Okay. So in conclusion, we just need to rethink, how we do what we do, change our mindset, right? Reshape our thinking and change our behaviors toward expenses and debt. If we do this, it will allow and support our ability to effectively manage our expenses and use the design of the economic system we live in to work for our benefit. Okay. I invest in real estate, commercial real estate. And I have figured out a niche, so to speak, that works for me. So I invest in commercial real estate because I recognize the demand for office space for smaller businesses, self-employed people, as opposed to companies that need, space to house 15 or 18 or 12 employees. There's a ton of insurance agents, attorneys, therapists, hairstylists, limousine drivers, companies who do billing services and things of that nature. They are one-person shows. They need office space, but there's not a ton of options available for them to get a singular space that's affordable. In most cases, it's large suites because that's the traditional structure of the commercial office market. So I figured this out and capitalize on the opportunity to provide a service. So what I do is I approach business owners or commercial office owners that have vacancies and they're having trouble filling those vacancies. I'll go in and I will lease the entire suite, assuming that it fits my criteria and will support what I'm trying to do. I will lease the entire suite, then I will divide that suite up and sublease the individual office to smaller professionals. And when I do that, what it does is generate a profit. Now, there are occasions where I need to invest money into getting the facility to where it needs to be. So if I have to borrow money, and I'll just use an example recently, if I had to borrow money, in this particular case, I borrowed it from myself, but I had to borrow somewhere in the neighborhood of about $40,000 or $50,000 in order to get this particular facility up and running. I negotiated arrangements and terms that were favorable for me. And the net result is that 1 year later, that particular facility is generating north of $7,000 a month. So if you do the math, $7,000 times 12 months, It's about $84,000. If I took $50,000 to put that situation in place, and that $50,000 netted me a return of $84,000 a year, not a one-time return, I leveraged my money to improve my situation. That's understanding debt and making it work to your advantage. And if you can do that, you can put yourself in a position, not just with the debt situation, but just in terms of how you manage your money in general. If you can do that, you can position yourself to have a very successful financial future. And with that, we can open up the floor to any questions or comments that we may have.
All right. Well, thank you so much. We do have some questions here. When you were talking about the average household debt, you said something like 96,000. Does that include people's mortgages, or is that just unsecured debt?
Yeah, that includes a combination of secured and unsecured debt, mortgages, car notes, etc. Realize that that's an average for the household. Not everybody has a mortgage, right? So they just took that number based on the population size of the US, and they just calculated the total amount of outstanding debt by the number of people and just averaged it out. So that includes children and stuff like that, which we know children for the most part don't have debt. So that 96,000 is probably, when you talk about people who have mortgages and stuff like that, it's significantly higher.
All right. Can you talk about maybe the best way to put a budget together? Is there a simple way you recommend that you've seen work?
Yes. So in general, you want to do what works for you, but there's several systems. There's the envelope system, there's the bucket system. These are all different things that people have created to help people to get organized. What I do is I have a specific system that I use, and that system involves, first and foremost, identifying all of your expenses, everything that you spend money on. Of course, you have to identify what your income or what your revenue is, because the amount of money that you earn from your job is not your income. We talked about that in a previous webinar. I would encourage you to go back and look at that. But income, by my definition, is money that's coming in that does not have to go back out. If it has to go back out, it's not income. It's only passing through, and you happen to be the responsible party to make sure that it gets from point A to point B. But it's not yours. Case in point, if you have a promissory note or you have a mortgage, you sign a promissory note. If the mortgage is $1,000, that $1,000 belongs to the mortgage company, not you. So even though your job paid you $2,000, 1,000 of it you have already committed to the mortgage company. So your salary and your paycheck doesn't represent your income. So to answer the question, once you put the amount of revenue that you have coming in, then you identify all of your expenses, everything you spend money on. Do you go out to eat? How much do you spend going out to eat every month? You need to track it. Do you get your hair and nails done? How much do you spend a month doing that? You got to track it. Do you go out to the movies, or do you go to plays, to the theater? How often do you do that a month? You got to track it. And you got to do that for everything: groceries, insurance, credit cards, student loans, whatever you spend money on, you got to list it. Once you do that, you subtract that from the revenue. That tells you what you have to work with. But it also lets you know where you can make cuts. Do you have an Amazon account? Do you have a Hulu account? Do you have a what's the other streaming services? Sling account, right? Do you have something? Do you have a membership with LA Fitness? Like, are these other things that you have that you can get rid of if your situation is such where you need to free up money? Are you saving enough money for retirement? When you look at what your projection is for your retirement savings, is it going to be enough for you to have a comfortable retirement? If not, then you need to look at, okay, how can I free up money to put more money towards that? Do you have an emergency fund? If you don't have an emergency fund, when a crisis occurs, then you're forced to put things on credit cards, and then you still got to slow walk paying it down because you don't have enough money to pay the bill off in full. If you have a major economic situation like the roof or HVAC system or a major car repair that's not covered by insurance, right? So do you have an emergency fund? These are all things that have to be done in order to help to get your finances organized and to create a budget. Once you have that part done, then there's different ways or different systems out there that you can utilize based on what's comfortable for you. Mint has a good tool that people use. So it just varies. I use Excel spreadsheet. It's simple. I can put formulas in it. I can tailor it to fit the way I want it to work. So that's what I use. But there's a lot of different ways.
All right, this is a question about good debt and bad debt. If you have a lot of bad debt, does it make sense to concentrate on that first before getting into other debt that might necessarily generate an income, but talk about, kind of the sequence here.
Yeah, so it depends. That question is not a one size fits all answer. It depends. If you have a lot of bad debt, but you have $6,000 a month discretionary revenue left over, you may be able to leverage that money to create a scenario to accelerate paying off the debt. So it really depends. That's where talking with a financial professional could be beneficial if you don't necessarily have the information to do it on your own. So there's no one size fits all answer to that situation. However, if you're struggling, then absolutely you want to pay off the debt first and devise a plan in order to address that.
All right. Can you talk about a little bit about very old debt and maybe dealing with collections?
Yeah, so if you have judgments and collections, that's bondage. Okay, that's a more extreme level of bondage. It's an escalated level from just being in debt. It's now gone to a point where you're not paying it, and now you have a judgment on you, a lien, which means they can do a garnishment. It's affecting your credit and all of this. So you want to, again, get organized with your finances. You want to look at what you have available. You want to devise a plan because you still got to maintain your, basic quality of life. So you want to develop a plan. And I actually did this exact same thing. That at one point I had north of $100,000 of debt, and it actually impacted my tax situation. So I had over $50,000 of taxes. So I had to devise a plan, and it took me a few years to get out of it. But once I devised a plan, it gave me the ability to see the finish line, and it reduced the anxiety and the stress, right? And that's why you would really want to have a plan to organize your situation and decide how to approach it.
Well, thank you. That's a good note to end on positive to have kind of a own situation that's turned around like that. Thank you for that story. Well, folks, we want to thank you for being here and look to an email soon with a link to the replay of this event. And you're welcome to share that replay with friends and family. We again want to thank Will for being here and for the organizations that have made this webinar possible today. On behalf of Advice Chaser, thank you so much for coming. Here at Advice Chaser, we're all about helping you find a financial advisor who's a great fit for your life and your financial questions. Our matching service is free to you, and every one of our advisor partners is committed to offer a free initial consultation to anyone we introduce them to. find out more by going to advicechaser.com and clicking on the link to find an advisor. Just one more note, during the webinar, we talked about some of the other presentations that Will has done. If you go to advicechaser.com and click on the webinars tab, there's a search bar and you can type in Will Smith and find the rest of his presentations. Well, folks, we will see you hopefully at another webinar soon. Thank you so much for coming and have a wonderful rest of your day. Goodbye, everyone.